Welcome to Autopia, Episode 1, 30 Meters Closer. I'm Samstory. I'm autistic, and throughout my whole life, I've been interested in what's made autistic people, such as myself, different from the neurotypical population of the world. This is the first episode of Autopia, an alternate history / world-building podcast exploring the scenario of the world's population being almost entirely autistic, with neurotypical people as a small minority with the same consideration as autistic people in our own timeline. If you haven't already, I strongly recommend listening to the trailer for this show before starting with this episode, as some of the terms I use, such as autistic, neurotypical, etc., might not be familiar to you. On whichever podcast app you're listening to this on, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc., it should be easy to find. With that out of the way, let's dive right in. In this first episode, we're going to establish the point of divergence for humanity, i.e., the exact moment when the Autopia timeline branches off from our own. What events cause this, and what are the consequences of this? Firstly, we need to answer the question, how did the Earth form in the first place? In the vast darkness of space, as far as the eye can see, exists the clearest definition of the word nothing. Just what we would call blackness. For miles and miles, who knows how far. I say as far as the eye can see. Technically, there are no creatures that have eyes at the moment, but I digress. Then, out of all this darkness, out of a collision from dust particles, asteroids, and other fledgling planets, comes the Earth, the solar system's bastion of life. This planet, the third going out from the sun which it orbits around, being, at least relatively speaking, rather isolated from the others, is unique in that somehow it's the only one in the solar system that is suitable for spawning and hosting life. If you're listening to this, you should be very thankful that this turned out to be the case, as frankly, who knows what the odds were of this happening. So too should the future people of Autopia be incredibly grateful, although more on them later. Also, prepare for this statement on Earth being the only life-bearing planet in the solar system to become outdated in 2 weeks when scientists inevitably find life on Mars. Anyway, back to the story. What is it about the planet Earth that makes it so suitable for life? At roughly 150 billion meters, it's just the right distance away from the sun. You might have heard of Earth being referred to as in the Goldilocks zone, meaning it's just the right distance away from the sun. Not too far, not too close. Its magnetic field gives it a natural shield against solar radiation, which is a real deterrent for its more sun-influenced neighbours. And perhaps most importantly, it contains chemical ingredients such as water and carbon, giving rise to microscopic organisms, single-celled life, multi-celled life, arthropods, spiders, dinosaurs, mammals, and finally, primates, which would evolve into our star of the show, humans, around 300,000 years ago. So yeah, we're pretty new here. The creme de la creme of these humans is the human brain. This CPU of the olden days controls thoughts, memories, emotions, touching, basically all the senses. Yes, there are more than 5, but that's a topic for another time. In addition to things like hunger, breathing, body temperature, and all the various feelings that humans go through every day. So at this point in the episode, we're going to talk about the point of divergence of the timeline, i.e., what caused the vast majority of humanity to develop a different brain wiring that's comparable to what is referred to as autistic in our own timeline. It may not surprise you to learn, but autistic brains have noticeable differences in structure. Here's something that I should mention that will also come up a lot in the podcast. Autism is a spectrum condition, which means that the way one person experiences it can be totally different from another. Folks who would be considered low-functioning might also feel shame from being labelled as quote-unquote more neurodivergent, and go through life with the constant notion that they are broken or defective. Some of these differences used to be known as high-functioning and low-functioning autism, but these terms have largely fallen out of favour. They were used informally to refer to the amount of support an individual needs, but they presented problematic. For example, two individuals who would be considered high-functioning could have markedly different struggles in the neurotypical world. One might face difficulty with social interaction, while another might have overwhelming sensory difficulties. It's been argued that the umbrella term of high-functioning makes no effort to highlight the personal struggles that these two individuals deal with. Anyway, back to the spectrum. As a result of the variations in autistic people themselves, the spectrum is very broad. When creating a world in which everyone is autistic, these variations will also be copied over to Autopia as we flesh it out. It's just that this variation will apply to the majority of the population, and the 1% allistic minority will have variations too, and will exist on the allistic spectrum. More on that in a future episode. So how does the structure of autistic brains differ from that of neurotypical brains? What is the true definition of neurodiversity that this 3-pound organ is hiding in all of its wrinkly glory? Much like the planet on which brains live, the human brain is split into two halves called hemispheres. This is where we get the idea of a left brain and a right brain. Although a better way of thinking of this is that our cognitive processes and thinking are constantly flitting between the two halves. According to Jeffrey S. Anderson, a professor of radiology at the University of Utah, the hemispheres of the autistic brain have a little bit more trouble communicating with each other than those of the neurotypical brain, as well as differences such as having slightly more symmetry. There's also significantly more folding, that's wrinkles in the brain, which are caused by grey matter forming ripples, known as gyri and sulci. According to research from San Diego University, these wrinkles may develop differently in autistic brains, with significantly more folding in both hemispheres. Now, let's return to the world of Autopia. Keep in mind that within the world of Autopia, the world itself isn't called Autopia. It's just the Earth, as we know it. The Earth has developed, the continents have formed, there are rich jungles, deserts, plains and oceans. Humans are about to evolve into the form we know them as today. But there's one key difference. The Earth in the solar system is exactly the same, in just about every conceivable way, except its core is exactly 30 meters closer to the Sun than the core of our Earth. Now, you might be thinking, wow, surely this planet would be too hot to support life, wouldn't it? Well, actually not. There's just mostly more sunlight. But the temperature has increased by a negligible amount. Say Earth is 5 degrees Celsius hotter on average. This hotter planet has a couple of what one might call spicy consequences. The sunlight on this planet is brighter, much brighter, and would require any would-be inhabitants to adjust, perhaps by wearing sunglasses and slopping on some sunscreen. As mentioned, average temperatures are warmer. This naturally, and crucially, results in more wildfires. Wildfires are a much more common occurrence, and burn 60% more land and trees on average. As you'll see, this will carry many consequences with it. Fire is endemic to Autopia. Wildfires happen so frequently that so much smoke is released into the atmosphere. Some unique consequences arise from this. For one, the newly up-and-coming human race, which has been in the process of evolving from primates for the past 6 billion years, have adapted to their much smokier environment, being able to naturally breathe in and survive on air that has much more smoke content. Another fun consequence of this, well, I see it as fun, is that the entirety of humanity's brains develop differently, for the most part. The majority of these new smoke-breathing humans have some interesting characteristics. When talking to each other, they don't make eye contact unless it's strictly necessary, as it's just not comfortable for them. They possess and show entirely different facial expressions, and are much more verbal when describing feelings. All of the primates that evolved into Homo erectus, Neanderthals, and finally Homo sapiens, their brains take on the same structure associated with autism, i.e., for the most part, they're all autistic, with the exact same variations found in our real-life autistic spectrum projected onto every early human, except for a select few, whose brains take on a different structure. What are these early humans like in terms of how they communicate? how their society forms? Join me next time, where we'll answer these questions and more. Thanks for listening to this first episode of Autopia, and I'll see you in episode 2.